Hey St. Catharines, Mayor Matt Cisco here, and welcome to another episode of talkSTC. It's wonderful to have the opportunity once again this week to chat with you in your homes and tell you a little bit about what's going on in the city, all the great things that are occurring, all the work that City Council is doing on your behalf. This is a busy time in the city. There is a lot going on in St. Catharines. Obviously, the holiday time of year. There's all kinds of opportunities, events going on, places to get involved. Both from a council perspective and community activities, we have a laundry list of things. I'm going to try and give you an idea of what's coming up, what you can take advantage of over the next couple of weeks. First things first, and this is what today's episode will be about entirely. Council is in the midst of our budget process. This is an important time of year for us. We have a number of different meetings. We have workshops. We have lots of conversations going on around the city's budget as well. The regional budget is just coming to a close, so we are having all of those conversations and also engaging with residents. We've had a couple of opportunities to do that already. We'll talk more about it during this episode, but there are still opportunities out there for you to get involved if you want to have your say, and we'll discuss that with our first guest today. Before we get to our guest, though, we do have a bunch of events going on in the city that I know people are going to be excited about. The first one is the city's Let It Glow event. It kicked off on December 1st in Port Louis, an absolutely wonderful night. The weather didn't want to cooperate. It didn't seem to make much of a difference to the folks who were there. Light displays going on in Rennie Park. We opened up the carousel for one night only. Santa Claus and Mrs. Claus were there welcoming people at Lakeside Park. It was an absolutely fantastic evening. And a lot of fun was had by folks. But the fun continues. Let It Glow is going to go on throughout the month of December. It's actually going to go all the way to January 7th. So the light displays in Rennie Park and in Port Louis will continue. There's also downtown lighting installations at the Meridian Center Rankin Bridge, at the James Street Alley, and at City Hall. So if you have an opportunity to get downtown as well, take a look at all of those lights. I had the chance to check out the City Hall lights just a few nights ago when I was at Knox Presbyterian Church for their Out of the Cold fundraiser, and I had a bunch of folks come over and talk about how beautiful that big Christmas tree on the front lawn of City Hall looks. We also have the Winter Market back. Once again this year, Wednesdays in December from 4 to 8 at the St. Catharines Market at 90 King Street. Great vendors, lots of gift opportunities there. If you have the chance, head on down to the Farmers Market in downtown St. Catharines. As I said, Wednesdays in December from 4 to 8, lots of opportunities there. While you're downtown, there's lots of other retail in the downtown, and we also have a free holiday parking in the downtown from December 11th to the 30th between noon and 6, and of course free parking after 6 p.m. So if you get the chance, get out and check out some of those local retailers, those smaller retailers that we have in our downtown. They depend on patrons, folks coming into them, especially at this time of year, to purchase gifts and items for themselves. So feel free to check all of that out. It's a great opportunity this time of year to support local. We have our downtown businesses. We have businesses throughout the community, our wineries, our breweries. If you have a chance, those dollars, remember, they stay in the community and they help to support your friends, your family, the people around you. Today's episode, though, is all about the budget. And for those who know me, know that I spent a fair amount of time as the budget chair in St. Catharines. The budget is something I think is incredibly important for our community, for our councils. And so today we are going to talk both about the city budget. We're going to spend a good chunk of time talking about the city, but also the region budget. So I'm going to be joined first by St. Catharines Councillor and our budget chair, Carlos Garcia. We'll talk about the city budget with that conversation. And then my second guest today will be Fort Erie Mayor and Regional Budget Chair, Wayne Redekop, and we'll talk about the region's budget process as well. There's a lot of different platforms that both levels of government are using to keep the community involved and make sure that people know what's going on with the budgets. We'll discuss all of those opportunities as well. My first guest, though, is Councillor Carlos Garcia. Carlos, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Cisco. And before I say anything, I just wanted to add to what you just said that in addition to downtown, the city has had free parking afternoons starting December the 11th in Port Louis, so people can visit their shops as well.
This is why I love Carlos. Of all my counselors, I love the fact that you are so hyper-focused on getting people to Port Louis. I think it's amazing. So this is your 9th year as the Port Louis councillor. Sorry, you just finished your 9th year. You're coming into your 10th year now as a Port Louis councillor.
That's right.
2 terms plus 1 plus. I had to do the math there. Passionate about the city, but supportive of all things Port Louis. I enjoy the fact that whenever I'm at an event in Port Louis, I know you're going to be there. but you had a long and varied career before that in the private sector. You managed your own firm specializing in strategic planning for over 25 years. That's phenomenal. Now you're the budget committee chair. That's why you're here today. But I will say, I can't imagine anybody else on council filling that role right now. And I'm going to start by saying thank you, because I think you do an exceptional job of holding council's feet to the fire, holding staff's feet to the fire, and ultimately that's what a good budget chair is supposed to do. I'd like to believe, I speak from some experience, 8 years, but I think you're filling that role phenomenally. And I said a bunch of things to make you blush there. It might make this conversation a little bit easier. So we've worked together for 9 years. Before we get into the budget, tell me about the varied career, because it's one of my favorite things. You have a lot of insight that you can provide in a bunch of different topics we talk about at council. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. I appreciate the compliments. I have been blessed with having a very varied and interesting career, as you said. In the private sector, I worked for large companies such as Canadian General Electric, Labatt's, Inglis in appliances. And then, as you said, since about 1987, I think, 88, I started to focus strictly on business and strategic planning, because that seemed to be what I ended up focusing on in the private sector. So I had my very first big consulting assignment through a consulting firm in Toronto that had the assignment to do the original business plan for the Toronto Sky Dome. So I was involved in doing that plan from day one, and that was very unique at the time for several reasons. A, because it was the first private sector, public sector partnership that was formed to that extent to build a new facility in Toronto. There were like 25 different companies that were called Dome partners at the time. And I ended up doing that business plan. And at the time that the Sky Dome opened, and now the Rogers Centre is what it's called, it generated the highest operating profit of any stadium in the world, and it had the highest number of event days. It was also, of course, the first truly retractable sports multi-venue kind of facility, because it was designed to do other things besides sports. Unfortunately, as everybody would have heard the story, the place cost too much to build. It was the very first retractable roof, and anybody who has been to that stadium knows how massive that roof is. If you've been there when it moves, you don't want it to fall down, that's for sure. Today, there are many retractable roof stadiums around the world, but as a segue to that, through that consulting firm and contacts that I made at the time, I ended up doing business plans and what I call business-oriented feasibility studies, essentially to look at a potential facility and look at all the factors that influence traffic, public, other facilities nearby, essentially. And I ended up doing similar plans or strategic feasibility studies for a number of facilities around the world, from Dublin to Taiwan to Osaka, Frankfurt. I spent a lot of time in Frankfurt doing one for the new stadium there. And then what happened was I lost my late wife in 2014. And at the time, a few years before then, I was asked by some volunteers if I would consider running for regional council. And I said, no, I've never run for anything. I've never had anything to do with politics. But my wife, who was about to have a serious surgery at the time, is getting out of the car, and she says, oh, yeah, you got to do it. So anyway, I end up running for regional council, and my first time running for anything, and at the time, I remember the standard said, it's very difficult to get into regional council, and sure enough, I ended up 7th out of 6. And as it turned out, one of the long-term regional councilors unfortunately passed away, and I was elevated and appointed to be in regional council, so I was there for, I think, 2.5 years or so.
The budget. You've come into the position as the budget chair. You know, when we talk about the budget, the biggest conversation we're having right now is taxpayer affordability. So I'm hoping you can expand a little bit on what you think the city's role is, balancing the needs of the community and the things that need to be done, but how do we balance that with taxpayer affordability?
We have 3 separate budgets that we work on. We have the capital budget for capital items, which are items that have long life, and therefore they're funded usually with longer term financing. And we have the water or wastewater budget, which is a separate budget because the region is a major component of what we do in wastewater and water, because they own a lot of the infrastructure, including the pollution control plants.
Yeah.
And then they deliver the water to us and other municipalities, and from there on, we deliver it directly to city residents. And then last but not least is the operating budget, and this is the budget that of the city operations, and there's 10 different departments, operating departments at the city. They all have staff and they all have responsibilities like parks and municipal works and sewers and engineering. And I wanted to show this is just the operating budget.
Yeah.
And I understand this year, if I remember, it's about 195 pages.
Yes.
To give you an idea. So it's a pretty complex document, but you asked about affordability. That's very dear to my heart, because we had some really serious experiences this last 6 months or so, because the city ended up approving, despite my disapproval, a 10.5% tax increase, which is the largest in the city's history.
Now, I think it's important to recognize that it was shared between the region and the city, so it wasn't entirely city decisions, wasn't entirely regional decisions. This was very much a combination of the two.
Fair enough. No, very true. However, if you're a St. Catharines taxpayer, the fact is you got that kind of an increase.
Agreed.
So I wanted to make sure that we tried very hard to do something to mitigate that, and we had a number of meetings, and we ended up, because there was provincial legislation involved, that what I really wanted to do was to rebate some of that tax increase, but as we learned from legal, provincial legislation does not allow us to actually refund taxes or change them after they have been set out. So what we ended up doing with your support was to set up a special tax mitigation fund, where we set up, took some money from some reserves, and also from what we are calling gapping, which has become an internal word here, but the fact that we have positions approved in the budget that haven't been filled. And therefore, at the end of 2022, for example, there was a significant surplus due to that. And as I commented before, it's not just the public sector that is having trouble filling positions. I hear from people in the private sector the same thing. Yeah. The employment landscape out there changed totally after the pandemic, because we are all of a sudden now working from home and working remotely, and a lot of people don't want to go back into the office, or they want different jobs. So anyway, that and reserves has helped us set up this staff mitigation reserve, and we're hoping that the increase that we're going to see in 2024 or 2023 is going to be, I mean, I would like it to be no higher than 0, but I would like to make it as close to that as possible.
So there's still opportunities for folks to get involved. They can head to stcatharines.ca/budget, and they can also send their comments through to yourself, budget@stcatharines.ca. But I know you and I are both hopeful that there will be continued public engagement on this. We want to hear from folks. The budget that comes forward is going to be able to incorporate all the things that you and I hear, and looking forward to the budget debate this year. I think I agree with you. I think we need to be as close to 0 as possible, and I think we have a couple of things that we can do to make that happen. So, Carlos, I appreciate the opportunity for you to chat today, and you're going to be on this show on a much more regular basis, so we can discuss the budget and have further conversations so folks know what's going on. Right after the break, we will be back with Mayor Wayne Redekop. Welcome back, St. Catharines. We are back with our second guest today, and I'm very honored to have one of my regional council colleagues. He is the mayor of Fort Erie. He is the regional council budget committee chair, Wayne Redekop. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, we discussed, my first segment, I talked with Councillor Garcia, who is our city budget chair, and we thought the regional budget, given that it's as large a part of our property tax bill as the city budget, it was important to have you on as well. A little bit of a bio, some information. Born and raised in Fort Erie. And then on my cue card, it says legend with an exclamation point. I think that's fantastic. I think of you as a legend, but you were a councillor in Fort Erie for a couple of years. Then you were the mayor of Fort Erie. You took a break. You came back as the mayor of Fort Erie again. You've been there. I will say you are just the person I think of as the mayor of Fort Erie. There may have been others. I'm unaware.
Because you were a child when I first became the mayor.
Wouldn't go that far. You're a husband, a father, and a grandfather. And I will say the thing that impresses me the most here, you ran the Boston Marathon with your daughter twice.
Correct.
I'm just going to ask a geeky runner question. What was your qualifying time?
We had to qualify 3:45.
Okay.
And my best time is 3:33.
Oh, my best time is 3:59:13. And so I know I've got a lot of legwork to go before I come anywhere close to that.
Takes a lot of time.
I'm not in the right job to be training for a marathon right now.
Exactly.
I'll just say.
Although it's nice to be able to relieve the stress.
Agreed. I have to make the decision between running or lifting, and I really love to lift weights. So that's my trade-off right now.
Follow your passion.
There you go. So, regional budget. We've had a lot of conversations about budgets over the last 12 months in St. Catharines and Niagara across the region. You've been the budget chair. This is your first time going through this process this term.
Last year.
Last year was the first one. So
right. So this is the second year.
Second budget. You run a very tight ship procedurally. And I give a lot of credit because I think with budget, it's important to keep people on track. So I give credit where it's due. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of this year's budget, a little bit of 101. What is the regional budget responsible for?
Well, the region has major responsibilities, and directly they're responsible for community services, public health. There is a planning function. They've got a lot of corporate responsibilities in terms of communications, in terms of managing the finances. But then there's also Niagara Regional Housing, which is one of the agencies, boards, or committees. That also includes Niagara Regional Police, which has a large portion of the budget. There's waste management, and as you know, they now collect the revenues for the new Niagara Regional Transit.
Yeah.
So, and plus they provide the funding to the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority. So there's some pretty major areas of responsibility. And they do the water treatment and the wastewater treatment.
So there's a number of areas of crossover as well with the local area municipalities and things that there's shared responsibility for.
There are, yeah.
So I'm going to start with that one because we hear a lot, and I know you hear it as well down in Fort Erie, people talking about duplication of services between the two levels of government. There's been a lot of work that's been done over the last number of years to try and eliminate duplication where it exists. Where do you think we're at in terms of that process and finding the savings that should come about if we end that duplication?
Well, there's been a lot of sharing, and a lot of the sharing takes place between municipalities. So the region isn't necessarily part of that, but there are some examples. Recently, the example ended, but Fort Erie, Pelham, and one other municipality were sharing the legal services. So that's the type of thing that goes on. I know that in the north, there's some shared fire services. But in terms of the major issues, they would be things like the roads. People are driven crazy when they see, a regional snowplow, a municipal snowplow, a provincial snowplow, and if you live along the Niagara River, you'll also see a Parks Commission snowplow. So that they wonder about that, and they wonder about the duplication. In Fort Erie, we do part of the Parks Commission's roads. Which provides at least some rationale to the work that's being done in a standard level. So I would think that there's some work that can be done in terms of roads. I don't think the region has to download the roads, but they could certainly work with the municipalities to enter into contracts so that the municipalities are responsible for clearing the road. So that takes some of the regional trucks off the road, at least in the municipalities. The big one, of course, is the water and wastewater, and there's been talk for quite some time. I know that your predecessor is a big proponent of a water sewer utility, and that could very well result in some savings. The responsibilities are quite distinctive right now. The region's responsible basically for treating the water and the wastewater. There are some large sewer trunk mains and some large water mains, but the distribution systems or the collection systems for wastewater are within the realm of the municipalities. That works relatively well. The difficulty is that some municipalities have been expending more money on maintaining their infrastructure than other municipalities, and so if you were to go to a single utility, there'd have to be some accounting with respect to that, but those are all things that could be worked out. Fort Erie is in a rather unique situation because we have 2 wastewater treatment plants and we have a water treatment facility that service only Fort Erie. We have a third facility for wastewater. It's a lagoon that services Stevensville, but it's actually just outside of the town of Fort Erie boundaries in Niagara Falls. But that could also be, I think that will at some point be decommissioned. Probably the Anger Avenue treatment plant will take over the flows for that.
So with respect to this year's budget, those areas where we are able to find savings, what's the biggest challenge this year?
Well, the biggest challenge is the infrastructure and the allocation of capital resources to maintain the existing infrastructure, maintain future infrastructure, and build future infrastructure, but also try to cover the long-term maintenance responsibilities. And so wastewater and water are major components of the responsibilities of the region, and there is a large infrastructure gap. That is the amount of money that's going to be necessary for the long term to maintain those facilities and the amount of money that's actually being expended. In many of the municipalities, and Fort Erie is no different, we've got a lot of aging infrastructure. We've been putting money into our capital reserves to cover our infrastructure needs over the year. And in 2022, we'd actually covered the infrastructure gap. So we had actually covered the difference between what we needed and what we were allocating. With the significant increase in the cost of construction projects now, the increase in the cost of supplies, we've fallen a bit behind. And I think it's fair to say that the upper levels of government need to provide some assistance to the municipalities, because if they've got growth agendas, which they do, you're not welcoming or wanting to welcome 500,000 newcomers every year, year after year after year into the country. You're not wanting to expand your ability to meet the housing needs of those newcomers without having the infrastructure available. And so it's not just water and wastewater, it's your schools, it's your healthcare facilities, it's your recreational facilities. Those are all things that upper levels of government need to take into account when they're trying to factor in this new growth in population.
I've said it many times, I'll say it again, everybody wants the happy headline, but nobody wants to pay the bill that comes at the end, and that's a perfect example of it. I think I know what your answer is going to be on this, because I think you just described it. I know when I was the budget chair, I had a different insight into the finances of the municipality and a lot of the pieces around it, like infrastructure. And so my concerns, changed over time to what I was concerned about. If you had to identify the thing that you wish more councillors understood about what concerns you with respect to budgeting and finances, what would it be? It sounds to me like you're going to say infrastructure, and I want to say that because that was what I came to as the budget chair, or is there something else you think is not well understood?
Well, I actually think that councillors have taken to heart the importance of allocating funding to infrastructure. I think over this term of council, I think the councillors have fully understood and appreciate that there are some long-term responsibilities that we have to start seriously addressing. And unfortunately, that's something that the property owners who are paying the taxes are going to have to recognize. But I would think another equally important aspect is how we do what we do. How does the region do what it does? And I've had a lot of discussions. As you know, the budget chair spends more time with the staff on these issues than any other councillor, and therefore has the ability to gain some additional insights. So trying to impart that information to councillors is part of the responsibility of the budget chair. Trying to make sure that the staff imparts to the public these issues is their responsibility, the budget chair's responsibility, and ultimately council's responsibility. But I believe that, and it's not going to happen next year or the year after, but we need to really look at how we deliver the services that we deliver and try to find ways that are different. And different, hopefully, in the sense that they are more efficient and can actually cover more territory so that we get greater value for the dollars that we're expending and that we're asking the property taxpayers to pay.
I think your point there is actually really well taken, and there is a necessity for all levels of government to identify those areas in their services that they offer and find different ways to do them, because there's technological options that exist now that didn't in the past. There's private sectors popping up all over the place that might be able to handle certain aspects of what we do better, but I think that's probably something, you're right, I don't know if it's well understood by everybody, and it's a thing that needs to become better understood. It's heartening from my perspective to hear you say that you feel like this term of regional councillor has grappled with the infrastructure problem. I feel a similar way with my city council, in that I think people are starting to really wrap their heads, and I give some credit to that, to the staff that we have at both levels that have done the asset management planning and then have been able to communicate it in a way that I think makes sense, not just to the councillors, but to the community as well. Because ultimately, if we know those pressures exist, we have to explain that to residents so they understand why we're making the decisions we do.
Well, the requirement to create asset management plans is actually quite fundamentally important. Not only does it require the municipalities to identify their assets and the value of those assets and how they're going to maintain those over the long term, but when we go to the province or the federal government looking for financial assistance to pay for that, we'll be able to show them, here's what the value of our infrastructure is, here's what it costs to maintain this, and this is why you need to be putting money into this pot. 30 years ago they did. Now it's just very haphazard.
Yeah.
But there needs to be some federal, provincial, local government programs where municipalities can rely upon a steady and continuous flow of revenues to assist them with their infrastructure.
I think we're going to end it on that call to action to our friends in upper levels of government. Mayor Redekop, thank you so much for coming in today. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Excellent. Folks, we'll be right back after this. St. Catharines, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Talk STC. I want to say thank you to Carlos Garcia, the St. Catharines Budget Chair. I want to say thank you to Wayne Redekop, the Mayor of Fort Erie, and the Regional Budget Chair. Thank you so much for coming in, talking about the budget process. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Talk STC. Take care of yourselves and stay safe during the holiday season.